"I do not negotiate with women," said Alaric, Duke of Ufford, and set down his pen as though the matter were closed for all eternity. The long table at the Cray navigation office went very quiet. Rain ticked at the windows. 10 men in good broadcloth studied the grain of the mahogany as if it might open and swallow them, and at the far end of that table, alone among them, a young woman in grey wool folded her hands upon a leather ledger and looked at him without a flicker. "Then your grace does not negotiate," said Miss Verity Locksley, "for the wharves are mine." She said it pleasantly. That was what he would remember afterward, lying awake with the fire dying in the grate, that she had said it as pleasantly as a hostess offering more tea, not shrill, not wounded. Merely stating a fact he had been too vain to trouble himself with in the tone of a woman correcting the weather. "Your father's wharves," he said. "Locksley is dead these 2 years. The lease sits with his executors, and I am given to understand." "Your grace is given to understand a great deal that is not so." She opened the ledger. She did not consult it. She opened it the way a duellist opens a hand. "The lease at Salomo Wharf was reassigned to me in October of the year 8 by deed, witnessed and enrolled. The 4 coal staithers below the lock are mine. The lighter fleet, 19 boats and a spare, is mine. The right of passage through the Locksley Cut, which your coal must take to reach Tidewater, is mine. Your grace may negotiate with a woman, or your grace may leave 4,000 tons of Ufford coal sitting on the hill in the rain. Those are the only 2 arrangements the world permits." Someone coughed. Alaric felt the blood come up his neck, hot and slow, and hated it. He was 36 years old. He had commanded men. He had faced the lords with a bad bill and turned it, and he had buried a father who had taught him, in the same lesson, both to hold his tongue and to hold his ground. He had never in his life been spoken to in such a manner, and the appalling thing, the thing that lodged like a splinter beneath the nail, was that every word of it appeared to be true. "Mr. Rundle," he said, without looking at his agent, "is this correct?" Rundle went the colour of ash. "Your grace, the deed, there was some question. I had understood the executors." "Mr. Rundle understood," said Miss Locksley, "that a wharf owned by a woman must be a wharf owned by nobody in particular. It is a common failure of understanding. It is also, this year, an expensive one." And here she rose. Alaric would afterward be unable to say precisely what he had expected. Tears, perhaps. A flounce. Some appeal to his rank, some flutter of the hand, and a request that a gentleman be reasonable, at which he would have been gracious and generous, and the whole business would have been settled by dinner. She did none of it. She closed the ledger, tucked it beneath her arm, and turned, not to him, to the broad, weathered man sitting 3 chairs down, a man in a plain coat with black beneath his fingernails and a face like a hillside. "Mr. Stanwick," she said, "you offered me 6 pence the ton on the through carriage and a 5-year term, with the maintenance of the lower lock at your charge. Do you stand by it?" Edmund Stanwick, ironmaster, who had been born in a colliery row and now owned the whole hill behind it, rose slowly to his feet. He had the grace, Alaric noticed with a kind of scalding clarity, not to smile. "I do, ma'am," said Stanwick. "Then we are agreed." She put out her hand. Afterward, Alaric could recall the room only in pieces: the rain, the smell of wet wool and lamp oil, the small gold ring on her 3rd finger that had been her mother's. But he remembered that handshake entire, and would remember it, he suspected, upon his deathbed. Her hand was ungloved. It was not a lady's hand. There was ink on the side of the 2nd finger, the callus of a woman who wrote her own figures and did not employ a man to do it for her. Stanwick's fist closed around it like a vice around a nail, and she did not wince, and the 2 of them shook once, firmly, the way men do at a horse fair when the thing is done and cannot be undone. "My clerk will wait upon yours in the morning," she said. "He'll find the kettle on," said Stanwick. And Miss Verity Locksley walked the length of that table, past 10 men who had come to watch a duke settle a small provincial difficulty, and past the duke himself, who had risen without in the least intending to, and out through the door into the rain. She did not slam it. She closed it softly, and the soft click of it was worse than any slamming. Nobody spoke. Alaric stood at the head of the table with his hand resting on a contract that was now worth precisely nothing, and discovered that his heart was beating as though he had run a mile uphill. "Well," said Stanwick pleasantly, gathering his hat, "I'd say your grace has had an education. He was not wrong." It took Rundle 4 days to assemble the full and hideous account, and Alaric read it standing up, at the window of the muniment room at Winterset Court, with a grey November afternoon pressing at the glass. Locksley Coal Wharves hers, the Cut hers, the Stathers hers, and Stanwick, who was building an ironworks at the head of the valley and needed a road to the sea for his pigs and his bar, had now bought her carrying capacity for 5 years, entire, which meant that the coal of a Ford, 4,000 tons of it and rising, would go to Tidewater at whatever price Stanwick chose to leave over. If Stanwick chose to leave anywhere at all, it was not ruin. Dukes are not ruined by 4,000 tons of coal. It was worse than ruin. It was a public and perfectly avoidable foolishness, and it had been avoidable by the simple expedient of listening to a woman for the length of a quarter of an hour. "Your Grace," said Rundle miserably, "the fault is mine. The deed. The fault is not yours." Alaric heard his own voice, flat and quiet. "You told me a wharf had changed hands and that the new holder wished to treat with me. You did not tell me the holder's name, because it did not occur to you that the name would signify. It did not occur to me either." "That is not your fault, Rundle. It is mine. Have my horse saddled. Now, Your Grace, it's coming on to rain. It is always coming on to rain. My horse." He rode down the valley in the wet with his collar up and his temper cooling into something far more uncomfortable than temper. The road ran beside the Cut for 3 miles, and he saw the thing, perhaps for the first time in his life, as a working man might see it. The towpath black with hoof marks, the lighters low in the water under their black cargo, a boy leading a horse and singing, his coal, her boats, her water. Salome Wharf sat where the Cut met the tideway, and it was not what he had imagined. He had imagined, insofar as he had imagined anything, a shed and a sulky clerk. He found a yard swept clean, a crane in good order, a tally house with its door open and a fire inside, and men working in the rain, with the unhurried speed of men who are not afraid of being shouted at. She was in the yard. Not in the tally house, in the yard, in a grey cloak going dark at the shoulders with a slate in her hand counting baskets. She saw him. She finished counting. That, he thought, was deliberate. She finished counting and made a mark, and only then turned, and by then he had dismounted and was standing in her mud with his hat in his hand, and no earthly notion of what he meant to say. "Your Grace," she curtsied. It was a perfectly correct curtsy. It was, somehow, the least respectful thing that had ever been done to him. "You are 3 days early. The Stanwick contract is not lodged until Friday, if you have come to try to buy it out from under him. That is not why I have come. No." She tilted her head. Rain ran off the brim of her bonnet. "Then Your Grace has come to explain to me that women have no head for business, and that I am to be pitied, and that a competent man of affairs will be provided to relieve me of the burden." My father's partners came with that speech, one after another, for a 12-month after he died. They wore black gloves and looked at my hands when they said it. "I know the speech, Your Grace, and I can recite it faster than you can deliver it, so we may both be spared. Miss Locksley, you said you do not negotiate with women." Her chin came up. There was colour in her face now, and he understood, with a curious lurch, that she had not been unmoved in that room at all. She had simply refused to be seen. "Do you know what it cost me to sit at that table? 11 men and a duke, and every one of them looking at the door behind me for the man who would come and speak for me. There is no man. There has been no man for 2 years. There is a ledger and there is me, and if I had wept, or blushed, or begged, not one of you would ever have signed a paper with my name on it again. So I did not weep, and you told me in front of all of them that I did not exist." The rain came down between them. Alaric stood in the mud of her yard and felt a lifetime of certainties shift beneath his boots like a wet bank giving way. "Yes," he said. She blinked. "Yes, that is what I did." He turned his hat in his hands, and found the words difficult and said them anyway. It was arrogant. It was ignorant, which is worse. You had the truth of the matter and I had my dignity, and I chose my dignity, and it has cost me 4,000 tons of coal and a great deal else besides, and I find that I mind the else a good deal more than the coal. Verity Locksley looked at him for a long moment. Behind her, a crane swung and a man called out, and the tide came sliding up the mud with its small grey noise. "That," she said at last, "was not the speech." "No. You are aware that it changes nothing. Mr. Stanwick has my boats until the year 15. I am aware." "Then why have you come, Your Grace?" And that, he thought, was the question, and he had ridden 3 miles in the rain without once daring to put it to himself. Because, he said, you were right, and nobody has been right at me in a very long while, and I discover that I should like to hear it again. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. It was not a smile. It was the place where a smile is kept. Then your grace had better come out of the rain, said Miss Locksley, before he catches cold and it is laid at my door. The tally house was 8 feet by 10, and smelled of tar, tea and paper. A stove burned in the corner. On the walls on nails hung a great many slates, and on the table lay the ledger, and beside the ledger a plate with half a slice of bread and butter on it, which she moved without embarrassment when he came in, as one moves one's dinner for a visitor one did not invite. Alaric had sat in the finest rooms in the kingdom. He had never in his life felt so entirely out of place, nor unaccountably so glad to be somewhere. You will want to know how it was done, she said, pouring tea into a cup that did not match its saucer. Men always do. They wish to find the trick of it, so that they may say afterward that there was a trick. There was no trick. There was arithmetic. It is very like a trick to those who have not tried it. She sat down opposite him and pushed the ledger round so that it faced him. Look, if you please, at the 3rd column. He looked. Figures in a small upright hand ruled and totaled and carried across, and every entry alive with the smell of the river, baskets, tons, tolls, wages, a horse lamed at the 2nd lock, a lighter's bottom recorked 6pence here, £4 there, and at the foot of it a sum. Your coal, she said, tapping, has been leaving my wharf at 5pence halfpenny the ton these 5 years, and has been costing me 7pence farthing to move. Your agent negotiated that rate with my father when my father was dying and had not the strength to argue, and my father, who was fond of your father, let it stand. Every ton of a foot coal that goes down my cut, your grace, I pay for the privilege of carrying. Did you know that? No. No. It is not a thing a duke is required to know. She said it without heat. But it is a thing I am required to know, because if I do not know it, I am in the Marshalsea by Lady Day and my 19 boatmen are on the parish. So when your Mr. Rundle wrote to me and said that his grace would see me, and would be pleased to renew the old terms, and would I bring my papers, I brought my papers. And I sat in that room prepared to give you the whole of it, at a fair rate, better than Stanwix, because Offord coal is steady and Stanwix Ironworks is a gamble, and a woman with 19 boats cannot afford a gamble. Alaric set down the cup. You meant to deal with me. I meant to deal with you. I had the figures in my hand. Her mouth twisted, wry, not bitter. And you said 8 words, your grace, and made it impossible. The stove ticked. Out in the yard a man was singing about a girl in Belworth. Then I have not merely been a fool, he said slowly. I have been an expensive fool, and I have made you an expensive one also, for you have taken the gamble because the steady man insulted you. Miss Locksley's brows rose. She regarded him for a moment as one regards a dog that has unexpectedly said good morning. Yes, she said. That is precisely what I have done, and I would do it again, and I shall very likely regret it in February, and I am not sorry. No, said Alaric, nor should you be. And there it was again, that small motion at the corner of her mouth, the place where a smile is kept. He came back on the Thursday. He told himself it was to see the lower lock. He came back on the Monday after that, with a question about the depth over the sill at neap tides, which he had got out of a book, and which she answered in 11 words, and then looked at him rather too long. He came back on the Friday with no question at all, and stood in the yard while she counted, and when she had finished counting she said, without turning round, Your Grace is aware that a duke standing in a coal yard for an hour is remarked upon. By whom? By everyone, Your Grace. That is what everyone is for. Let them remark. He heard himself say it and found he meant it, which was inconvenient. Miss Locksley, teach me the ledger. She turned round then. I beg your pardon? You said it was arithmetic. Teach me the arithmetic. I have owned that coal and that hill and those miners and their cottages and their children's schooling for 11 years, and I have never once been able to say what it costs to bring a ton of it to salt water. My father could not have said it either. We have both of us been carried about the world in a chair by men we did not trouble to look at, and I have lately been shown, in a public room, precisely what that is worth. He set his hat down on a barrel, deliberately, as a man puts down a weapon. I am not asking to be relieved of the burden. I am asking to be taught. If you find that ridiculous, say so, and I shall go away and be ridiculous somewhere else. Verity Locksley stood very still in the middle of her yard, with the slate in her hand and the rain beginning again, and looked at him as though the ground had moved for her too. Tuesdays, she said. I do the wages on Tuesdays and I am short of a hand. You may carry the tally. I shall carry the tally. Your Grace will not like it. It is cold, and it is tedious, and the men will say things about you within your hearing, and I shall not stop them. Then Tuesday, said Alaric, and rode home with his heart going absurdly, like a boy who has been asked to dance. He carried the tally. He carried it in December, when the frost made the towpath ring, and the boatman called him Your Grace with an insolence so finely judged that he could not object to it, and then, by the third week, stopped calling him anything at all, and simply handed him the slate. He learned the difference between a full basket and a heaped one. He learned that a lock keeper who is paid on Friday works better than a lock keeper who is paid at Christmas. He learned that Verity Locksley rose at 5, that she read her father's old letters when she thought no one was by, and that she had a temper, a quick and splendid one, which she spent chiefly upon merchants who wrote to her as Dear Sir, and then, upon being corrected, as Dear Madam, with an air of vast forbearance. He learned that when she laughed, really laughed, head back, at some absurdity of the wharf, something in his chest turned over like a boat coming about, and he had to look away at the water and count barges until it passed. You are staring, Your Grace, she said once, without looking up from her column of figures. I am observing, said Alaric, that you have carried the 4 into the wrong line. She looked. She had not. She said so. She was right, and she let him know it, and he laughed aloud in the tally house, a sound so unfamiliar in his own throat that he startled himself. The county, of course, began to talk. It talked first in the drawing-room at Winterset Court, in the person of his aunt, the Dowager Lady Merion, who arrived in a travelling coach, and a state of high moral crisis, and came directly to the point over the soup. A wharfinger, Alaric. A shipowner and a canal proprietor, said Alaric, and I would thank you to get the trade right if you are going to sneer at it. Her father sold coal. My father sold coal. He merely had the delicacy to do it through 4 intermediaries so that the money reached him with the smell washed off. He laid down his spoon. Aunt, if you have come to tell me that Miss Locksley is beneath me, you may save your breath and your horses. She is the most competent person of my acquaintance, and the list of persons of my acquaintance includes 2 cabinet ministers. Competent, said Lady Merion, is what one says of a bailiff. It is what one says, he replied, when one cannot say beautiful without giving oneself away. There was a small, terrible silence in which Alaric heard, with perfect clarity, what he had just said. His aunt set down her glass. Oh, my dear boy, she said. Dear. The frost broke on the 14th of January, and it broke badly, with 3 days of rain on ground still hard as iron. And at 11 o'clock at night a boy on a mule came hammering at the gates of Winterset Court to say that the embankment above the Marley aqueduct was leaking, and the water was going through, and Miss Locksley was out on the bank with lanterns and every man she could raise. He did not send Rundle. He did not send anyone. He was in the saddle in 4 minutes and on the towpath in 20, and what he found there, in a wilderness of black rain and swinging lights, was the thing that undid him entirely. A slight figure in a soaked cloak, up to her knees in the breach, passing sandbags hand to hand down a line of half-drowned boatmen and shouting orders in a voice gone hoarse. Miss Locksley. She looked up. Her face in the lantern light was streaked with mud and shining with rain and utterly, ferociously awake. Your Grace, she gasped, if you are here to watch, go home. If you are here to work, take the far end. The bank is going at the culvert, and if it goes we lose the aqueduct. And if we lose the aqueduct, we lose the cut. And if we lose the cut, then 19 boatmen are on the parish, said Alaric, and shrugged out of his coat, and went into the water. The water was black, and it was cold beyond anything he had known, and it pulled at his legs with a slow, patient malice, as though the cut had decided to have him and could afford to wait. He took the far end. There were, he supposed afterwards, some 40 men on that bank before the night was done, boatmen, colliers who had walked down from the Ufford pit when the word went round, a lock keeper, a farrier, 2 farmers with a cart of hurdles, and 1 duke. who worked in his shirt sleeves with the mud to his waist and did not once give an order, because the person giving the orders was doing it better than he could have done. She was everywhere. She was on the bank on the aqueduct, down in the breach with a lantern held high, calling for hurdles, for straw, for the clay from the old puddling heap by the second lock, and bring it in the barrows, not the baskets. The baskets will lose half of it, and the men went where she sent them without a murmur, because they had been going where she sent them for 2 years and the cut was still there. At 3 in the morning the culvert gave. Alaric felt it go beneath his feet, a shudder and then a sucking, and he heard a man shout, and he turned and saw her lantern tip and vanish. He did not remember going in after her. There was the bank, and then there was the water, and then there was her arm under his hand, and he had her hard against him, both of them chest deep and the current dragging like a hand at his knees, and he was hauling backward, blind, until his heel struck stone and other hands came down and took them both. They lay on the towpath in the rain. You, she said when she could speak, have ruined a very good coat. It was not a good coat. It was an excellent coat, your grace, and everybody in 3 parishes knew what it cost. And then she laughed, a broken, gasping, shivering laugh with the rain coming down on her upturned face, and Alaric, propped on one elbow in the mud beside her, looked down at Verity Locksley and understood, with a completeness that frightened him, that he would go into that water again, and every night for the rest of his life, if she asked it, and that she would never ask it, and that this was precisely and exactly why. Her hair was down. There was mud on her cheek. He lifted his hand and stopped, with his fingers a bare inch from her face, close enough to feel the warmth of her skin against the cold of his own. She went very still. The clay, she whispered. The clay, he agreed hoarsely, and got up, and gave her his hand, and pulled her to her feet, and did not let go of her fingers for 1 heartbeat longer than a gentleman ought. They stopped the breach at dawn, with clay and hurdles and straw and 40 men, and when the sun came up grey over the aqueduct the water was holding, and the cut was whole, and somebody, a boatman with a beard like a hedge, put a tin cup of something dreadful into the Duke of Afford's hand and told him he'd done middling well for a beginner. Alaric drank it. It was, he thought, quite the finest thing he had ever been given. He proposed to her on the 9th of February, and he made a thorough mess of it. He had rehearsed. That was the trouble. He had rehearsed it as he rehearsed a speech to the Lords, with the arguments laid out in order of weight, and he stood in her tally house with his hat in his hand and delivered them. The Stanwyck contract runs to the year 15, he said, but he would release you, and he is an honest man, and he would not stand in the way. If we were to join our interests, the cut and the pit, and the wharves would be one undertaking. Your boats would carry my coal at a rate that would put an end to the 7 farthing forever. The aqueduct would be rebuilt in stone at my charge. There would be no more Februaries in which you must lie awake over 19 men and a spare boat. You would have... He stopped because she had gone quite white. Go on, said Verity. You were about to tell me what I would have. Security. Yes, she said. That is what I thought you were about to tell me. She closed the ledger. She closed it very quietly, and the sound of it was the sound of a door in a rainy room shutting softly. 2 months before, and Alaric's blood went cold. Your Grace, do you know what you have just done? You have offered me terms. Her voice shook. She steadied it ruthlessly the way she steadied it in front of merchants. You have stood in my father's tally house and laid out a schedule of advantages, as though I were a wharf to be bought, and a good bargain too, and at the end of it, security. As if the whole of my life had been an unfortunate condition to be relieved. I did not build this to be relieved of it. I built it because it is mine, and because when they came in their black gloves and told me to sell, I would not, and it nearly killed me, and it is mine. Verity. You said you did not negotiate with women. She was at the window, her back to him, her shoulders rigid, and now you negotiate with nothing else. You have simply changed the terms. Good day, Your Grace. He rode home through a countryside he did not see. For 3 days he did not go near the wharf. On the 4th, Edmund Stanwyck came to Winterset Court, filling the doorway of the library like a wall, and stood turning his hat in his enormous hands. I'll be brief, Your Grace, for I've a furnace to blow in. I've come about Miss Locksley. Alaric's hand closed on the arm of his chair. Have ye? Stanwyck looked at him steadily. There's a deal of talk in the town that I'm to marry her. I'm not. I asked her mind a year back when she was near drowning under it, and I'd have been glad to hold her head above water. She thanked me very civil and said no, and she was right, for I'd have been kind to her and I'd have swallowed her whole, and she knew it before I did. He turned the hat again. I'm not come to make trouble. I'm come to say a thing, and then I'll go. There's 100 men in this county would take her wharf off her and call it charity. There's one that carried her tally in the frost and never once told her how to do her own arithmetic. She noticed. Women notice, your grace, whatever we tell ourselves. The fire cracked. Alaric found that he could not immediately speak. She has refused me, he said at last, and she was right to. I offered her terms. Stanwix's weathered face creased into something very like sympathy. Then offer her summat else, he said, and don't be clever about it. She's had clevern. She's not had an honest one. He put his hat on. And if your grace wants my carriage contract broke, your grace has only to say so, and she'll not hear it came from me. But I'd not do it. She'd never forgive either of us for arranging her. The subscription assembly at Belworth was held on the last Thursday of the month, and every family of consequence in the county was in that long room, and so was every family of no consequence whatever, which was rather the point of a subscription assembly, and which was why his aunt had told him plainly that Miss Locksley would be there, and that she would be cut. She was cut. He saw it as he came in, saw it in an instant from the doorway, before the master of ceremonies had even got his name out. She stood by the third window in a gown of dark green silk, playing with her mother's small gold ring and a fall of lace at the throat that had been mended and mended again, and about her at a distance of some 6 feet, there was a little empty island of floor. The Misses Fenimore had their backs turned. Lady Marian's friends were fanning themselves at a great rate. The music was playing and nobody had asked her to dance, and nobody was going to, and she stood there with her chin up and her hands quiet and her whole soul refusing, absolutely refusing to be seen to mind. Alaric had been in that room 100 times. He knew exactly what it cost to cross it. He crossed it. He walked the length of the long room at Belworth in front of 200 people, past his aunt, past the Fenimores, past a viscount and a bishop and every soul who had ever bowed to him, and the music faltered, and the talk went out like a candle, and he came to a stop before her and bowed as he would have bowed to a queen. Miss Locksley, her eyes were enormous. Your grace, you should not. There is a great deal, said Alaric, clearly in the voice he used in the Lords, that I should not have done. Chiefly, I should not have sat at the head of a table in November and told you that I do not negotiate with women. It was the stupidest sentence of my life, and it has been my education, and I find I am not ashamed to say so in company. Somebody dropped a fan. You told me once, he went on, and now his voice was not the voice of the Lords at all, that you did not build your life in order to be relieved of it. You were right. So I have not come to relieve you of it. I have come to ask whether you would consider taking on a partner who is a great deal of trouble, who knows nothing whatever about neap tides, who will require to be taught the ledger by a patient woman on Tuesdays until he is old and grey, and who loves you. He drew a breath. Who loves you, Verity, past all sense and all bargaining, and who would rather stand in the mud of your yard than at the head of any table in England? The room made no sound at all. Verity Locksley looked up at him, and her eyes were bright, and her mouth was doing that thing it did, the place where a smile is kept, except that this time the smile got out, and it was like the sun coming up over the aqueduct. The aqueduct, she said unsteadily, is to be rebuilt in stone. At your charge, said Alaric, out of the joint account, and you will hold the pen, and the coal, 5 pence halfpenny is robbery, then rob me. The men are to be paid on Fridays, all of them, the pit as well as the boats. Fridays, he agreed, and a school at the pit head, and you may have the choosing of the master. She was laughing now and crying a little, and not troubling to hide either. And Alaric, Duke of Afford, in the middle of the assembly room at Belworth, with 200 pairs of eyes upon him, did the only thing that seemed to him adequate to the occasion. He put out his hand, not to be kissed, not to be taken as a lady takes a gentleman's hand to be led out to a dance. He put it out flat and level between them as a man puts it out at a horse fair, when the thing is done and cannot be undone. For one long moment Verity looked at it, then she laid her ink-stained hand in his and shook it once firmly. And the Duke of Ufford closed his fingers around hers and did not let go. They were married in the spring. in the little church at Salomere that stood above the wharf, and the bells were rung badly and with tremendous enthusiasm by 19 boatmen and a spare. Edmund Stunwick gave her away and cried and denied it. Lady Marian, who had discovered within a fortnight that she had always championed the match, wept in the front pew and told everyone so. The colliers lined the road from the Lek Gate to the water, and the crane at Salomere was hung with flowers, and somebody had chalked on the tally house door, in a boatman's letters, God bless her Greikov Ueford over Yotu can count. She kept the wharf. She kept the boats and the cut and her father's name over the gate, and the deed was drawn so that it was hers, wholly and in her own right, which the lawyers said was irregular, and which the Duke said was the only regular thing about the whole business. In the years that followed, the great muniment room at Winterset Court came to be known in the household as the counting house, because the Duchess of Ufford worked there in the mornings with her ledgers spread across a table meant for treaties, and because the Duke of Ufford, who had commanded men, and turned a bad bill in the Lords, and been thought a hard man by everyone who had never seen his face when his wife came into a room, could most often be found beside her, in his shirt sleeves, carrying the tally. He would set down a column and push it across for her to check. She would find his error invariably, and tell him so, and he would defend it and lose. And every year on the 14th of January, on the anniversary of the breach, they walked out along the towpath to the Marley Aqueduct, stone now, and holding, and stood together above the dark water where he had gone in after her, and he would take her ungloved hand in his, ink and all, and hold it while the light went. Say it again, she would say, because she was a woman of business, and liked a thing confirmed. And the Duke of Ufford, who did not negotiate with women, would smile down at his wife and press her hand and say, "Every day of my life, madam. Those are the only terms on offer."